Test, test. Did you speak?
Do you need a test from me as well?
Yep. You're good. Let me
I'm
see
good.
if I could
Test, test.
get a little bit louder.
Test, test.
here.
We can talk quietly.
You're excellent. Yeah. Could you hear me?
I can hear. Well,
Just
I can
because-
just hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's a little bit loud, but I'll keep the headphones on for a little bit. Hey, everybody. I am your host a lot. Today we are here with author James Lindsay, well known for a few things. The college paper hoaxes. You sent in a bunch of fake articles to be published in science journals at some schools. I feel like you're also very well known for your constant speaking on CRT, critical race theory, and social justice. Very prominent on Twitter, especially. So thank you for taking the time to speak to me. We are currently at America Fest. Would you like to take a second to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, sure. I said James Lindsay, written a number of books. Most famously, written a book called Cynical Theories that outlines kind of the postmodern component of the social theory driving the unrest and mayhem throughout the country, the degradation of our academic institutions, and like you said, I wrote these fake academic articles a few years ago, exposing feminist gender studies, critical race theory scholarship, especially also where it touches into education and other fields like social work. And we were at America Fest. We're meeting with literally apparently thousands of people from all around the country who are ready to see America on the ascendant again and to step away from all this. And I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. You mentioned the fake article stuff. As I understand, you do have a PhD in math. You were involved in the academic institutions a lot. Did you see, at your time in these academic institutions, did you see CRT and woke theory be pervasive? And can you tell me some of your experiences there?
Sure. No, I did not. I was in the mathematics department, so social theory wasn't particularly popular.
Not yet. We might get the 2 + 2 is...
No, that's true. That's true. Well, I was there doing my PhD from 2003 to 2010, so that was a while ago. It hadn't quite blossomed. There were a few activists in the department who were interested in social causes and even looking at those in mathematics conferences and whatever, but it wasn't really any significant part. What drove me out of the university in 2010 was ultimately one of the tools that they used to install all this woke ideology administratively, and that is that they were switching their focus completely to student retention. Mm-hmm. So it was, our faculty meetings were don't fail the students, fail a minimum number of students, maybe only fail one student, make sure you curve their grades, get them good grades, don't lose their scholarships on them. And this is teaching mathematics classes, so we were kind of aghast. And it turns out that was a lever that was a result of their financial bad decision making on the, whether it's the student loan underwriting, federal student loan underwriting. What it made was this kind of competitive arms race for students to attract students, or for universities to attract students by student services.
Yes. So
universities across the nation invested in gigantic amounts of very expensive infrastructure, $50 million buildings, $10 million fitness center, a $3 million rec center or whatever, and they have these gigantic mortgages now, and so they're very beholden to bringing in tuition dollars that are going up and up and up and up, underwritten by federal loans, and so we can't lose students. Well, this is a perfect environment for a diversity office to come in and say, well, look at these students that want to quit because they feel like they're being bullied or like they don't have a special home, or you're not giving them a safe space, or you're not giving them special treatment. And so the most kind of complaining, cantankerous, sensitive, or hypersensitive students, 1 or 2% of the students could start to push around administrative policy. And they, well, how are we going to do this? Well, we'll use this extra money to hire more diversity-based bureaucrats who'll come in and staff these offices. So I was watching that happen at the level just of tailoring the curriculum and the grading protocols to retain students over everything.
But can I ask, were you interested in politics at this time?
No.
Okay, what got you interested in politics?
I got dragged into it.
Okay,
I'm still not actually interested in politics per se. I don't care Republican, Democrat, except that or any of this. I don't care about political strategy, except that I have to, because one of the two major political parties in our country and a significant chunk of the other have been captured by a totalitarian ideology that they're driving and forcing people to talk about things that have to be dealt with in the political arena.
So what brought you in? What dragged you in? Was there an event? I feel like a lot of people got dragged in. Everybody started caring about politics post-2016 when Trump got elected.
Sure.
Was there something there, an event?
Well, I mean, that was part of it. 2016, 2017 is when I really started to actually become active. But what had happened is I had watched wokeness creep into other things that I was involved in.
Yes.
And I'd watched it kind of tear it apart And that's what led us to write the fake academic articles in the first place. And then once I wrote those articles, of course, we were taken as some kind of an authority on all things that were happening that looked like the campus politics. And so we were speaking on that and studying the material that leads into it, studying the scholarship. And so that was kind of my being dragged into it, by my own decisions. But to where this isn't quite the political part yet. I was coming in as like a philosopher or kind of as a diagnostician of this, have read the scholarship, this is what the scholarship says, I'll tell anybody, right, left, or center. And then this has just taken on an increasingly important political valence, you say from the 2016 election, and that's true, but really starting with the lead up to the 2020 election, where it became very, very clear that one of the two parties unabashedly was full in on the ideology.
You're talking about, just to be clear, the Democrats here.
The Democratic Party is 100% in on woke ideology. The Biden plans are equity this, equity that, equity the other thing.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like a lot of progressives would refute that. Like,
yes.
Many progressives would say of Joe Biden that he's almost just a lame duck and he's an establishment Democrat. Doesn't even get much done on this. They recently were supposed to do college, community colleges only. They couldn't even get free community college passed. So how would you respond to somebody who says Joe Biden's not even expanding Medicare, Medicaid. He's hardly doing anything on the progressive list.
There's a million criticisms you could throw at Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. First of all, which is what I said was the main reason I was going to vote for Trump in the last election, was that he's corrupt. And so he's beholden to all kinds of interests. So I understand, and they're going to say he's bought by corporate interests and he's bought by, whatever other interests, and there's all this money involved. And they're not wrong. But it's the party itself that's got the fealty. What I would say is the measuring stick of those progressives who say he's not being progressive enough is that he's not caused the revolution. And I don't mean he's not attempted it. I mean that he hasn't caused it. So their only metric for being progressive enough is that you are a balls-to-the-wall radical activist that's overthrowing society by every means necessary possible at all times. And so, of course, he doesn't meet that definition. It turns out, even if you were to put an all-out Marxist in power, an explicit, open Marxist, he's still going to be limited by the Constitution. He's going to be limited by the process. He's going to be limited by Congress. And if he has any strategy to him, he's going to have to pick his battles. And so they're going to say that literally about anybody that falls even slightly to the right of Mao or Lenin that's doing a full-blown revolution on their behalf.
Can I ask you, we talk a lot, I know you talk a lot about critical race theory and woke theory and all that. I know this is appealing to some apolitical people because they see discrepancies in, people of color not making as much money as white people per se. They point to a lot of these statistics that show that it's not equal per population. That's how we like to measure things. And a lot of people, I guess they feel for the people who they think are unfortunate. And their way of trying to help those people is through this woke theory. I feel like it has a veneer of trying to help people. How would you respond to somebody who's woke because they want to help minorities? They see that less minorities go to school and they earn less, and white people have had a relatively good time in this country relative to some of those populations.
Right.
So how would you respond to a sympathetic person saying, hey, we need to have affirmative action? Although it is racist on its face, right? We're judging people based on immutable characteristics, but we need to do this to help kind of even the scale.
Right.
How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, there's kind of two things. One is, look at it in action. Is it working? Did all of these reforms they demanded with police and prisons work out, or are we seeing record levels of crime, record levels of property damage in primarily minority neighborhoods? Look at the fruits of their stuff in practice. Are we seeing them implement this program into the school and we're seeing, minority kids' achievement coming up? No, we're seeing everybody's achievement go down. So if we take on the face that their diagnosis is completely correct, which I don't obviously agree that it is, but if we take on its face that their diagnosis of the problem is completely correct, the prescription that they're offering is the wrong prescription. It's like if you go to the doctor and they prescribe you, or they identify, let's say you have skin cancer or something, and they diagnose your skin cancer correctly, but they give you the wrong medicine for it. It's not going to fix your skin cancer, and it might make you much sicker. So they're prescribing the wrong medicine. That's the first thing I would say. If their diagnosis is right, their medicine is still wrong. And in fact, their medicine is making more of the problems that they're able to then manipulate to ask for more application of the medicine. And that's the definition of snake oil.
What medicine would you prescribe to help solve some of these issues?
Well, before we talked about what I would do to help solve the issues, I want to talk about the second thing, which is I would tell them to read the literature. So, for example, there's this paper called something about queer futurity, the names of the papers are difficult to remember in their total, by Hannah Dyer. You can look up Hannah Dyer Queer Futurity, and you'll find the paper. It was written in 2016. Just recently, and she has this whole explanation about how queer theory is necessary in early childhood development, psychology, and early childhood education, and it's very important. And what she explains in there is that it's a mistake to go down the road of believing that queer theory is about creating stable LGBTQ identities. It's not about creating stable identities. It's about keeping people queer and not stabilizing them. Because if you stabilize them, then they're not in that position of kind of a radical fluidity any longer. So they're explicitly calling to not create, it's not a pathway for, say, lesbians or gays or bisexuals, etc., to find some way to understand themselves and to deal with the challenges that they might face in life that might be more significant or different. It's about making sure that they stay radical activists on behalf of queer theory. And they go further, she goes further in that paper at the end. I don't know if you've ever heard of the It Gets Better program that Dan Savage put forth. Dan Savage is a gay activist. He was, I don't know where he is now. He was in Seattle for a long time. He may still be there. And he came up with a program a number of years ago called It Gets Better. That was a mentorship program to gay and gender nonconforming and sexually nonconforming children, and teenagers particularly, to prevent them from committing suicide, explaining, listen, you're going to go through a rough adolescence, but it gets better. That was the message. And the whole second half of this paper I'm talking about queer futurity, says that that's a terrible approach. All that does is confirm that he's a conservative and that he has this conservative thing then, and that there are these problems that he doesn't actually want to address. He says, no, those problems exist, but you have to wait until you're an adult for things to get better. And so there's this, you must stay radical. We're not going to stabilize your identity. So if you read their literature, you find out it's not even about helping these different populations, whether it's sexual minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities. It's about using them for the purposes of their radical politics. And so that's the second very important thing I would tell people. If you think it's about helping people, it's not. It's about using different group populations and the problems that they have as a means to affect a particular kind of radical politics. And if you talk to many of them in those, I hate to use the word communities because they're not communities. Being gay doesn't put you in some kind of a city or a club or whatever. But broadly, to use that term, if you talk to them, a lot of them will tell you, this is messing up my life. I had a training at work, I've heard this from a guy, where they focused on, we have to have a gay sensitivity training at my work, and they focused on it. And for the next, it was this humiliating experience for me. And for months, I had to listen to all my coworkers tell me, oh, I always thought you were a freak. I have all this homophobia, and I'm so sorry, and I've always had it. And then they're asking him constantly about his sex life and made it a hostile working environment. It's exactly, so you bring those two things I said back together. It was about using his identity to move politics in the office, and it didn't help him at all because the theory is broken, because it's the wrong medicine. And that's and it's creating the problem. It's not creating a solution.
I wanted to pivot back to, we see a lot of these inequalities in our society. Should we deal with these inequalities? Is it worth dealing with? And if so, how do we do so?
Well, I don't think that we should deal with them by thinking in terms of broad-based groups of conventional categories like the black community or the gay community, because those are diverse groups made up of individuals with different perspectives, different ideas, different minds, different problems, depending on if, say, they're urban or rural, if they're, red state or blue state, north or south, east or west. There's different problems for all different kinds of people. So we should really be veering back toward looking at individual things that actually exist. For example, individuals exist, actual neighborhoods exist and have issues surrounding the neighborhoods. And we should look for solutions that actually look at the data, come up with we should listen, of course, come up with a potential solution, use the Democratic and small r Republican means to come up, county commissions, Congress, whatever, to come up with a potential solution, then look at what happens, evaluate the data, and adjust going forward, including abandoning programs. Let's stop with the group-based thinking. Let's minimize the amount, because we're seeing it in practice that it doesn't work, where let's use positive discrimination in order to create a leg up to try to level an unlevel playing field, because what we're finding is that it creates a myriad list, or a huge list of myriad of effects that are what you might call like collateral damage of the program.
Unintended consequences for every policy. Yeah. I also wanted to pivot and ask, I know we rag a lot on the Democrats here. We're at America Fest. More or less everybody here is Republican. Is there anything redeemable about the Democrats? Do they get anything right? Should we be able to praise them for anything?
Not right now. Generally speaking, what I would say, and this is saying, I've voted for Democrats in every office and every election I've ever voted in until 2020. And then I voted for Republicans from top to bottom for the first time, including President Trump.
So at one point you saw something redeemable of these Democrats of the past.
What I see, I actually think that I did not understand what was going on. But what I see is that we need a healthy left and a healthy left party, and we need a healthy right and a healthy right party. I'm still firm in my belief that when you have these two sides that are healthy, one to another, you can think of them, this is something my dad told me when I was a kid, that the side that's more liberal in general, whatever you call it, is like putting the gas pedal down in a car. And if you want to go somewhere, you got to put the gas down. But you can't just put the pedal to the metal and expect you're going to get there safely. You need a brake also. So you have a conservative party that acts as a brake, and then you have a left and right-hand political philosophy steering the wheel together. And if they're out of harmony, they're not controlling the wheel, you're not controlling the pedals correctly. Right now, the Democratic Party is completely captured and completely unhealthy.
We're talking about healthy and unhealthy Democratic parties, and I know you rag on them constantly.
Yes.
And often deservedly so. Do you think we have a healthy right, a healthy Republican Party?
We have a split party on the right where there's a constitutionalist wing that I think is increasingly healthy as it's getting its legs under it, and then we have a very establishment party that's corrupted by many of the same corruptions in other forms that the Democratic Party is corrupted by. And so I don't see a ton of difference between what people often call rhinos and what people would call Democrats when it comes to what they do with actual policy. Yeah, obviously you're going to get your typical conservative is going to go up on stage and they're going to stand up and they're going to say whatever and it's going to sound conservative. But then when it comes to what they actually vote on or don't vote on, it's going to have massive limits. And when it comes to the actual getting things done, what we need are constitutionalists who are both on the left and constitutionalists who are on the right, who see that the Constitution is the terra firma upon which this country is based. There are very few of those in the Democratic Party right now, and those few need to be awakened. There are more in the Republican Party right now, and the ones in the Republican Party who are not that are just the same problem.
I wanted to ask you about this political squabbling, I'll call it, happening now. Trump obviously tried to pass a huge infrastructure bill. He wasn't able to pass a huge infrastructure bill. Joe Biden, though, has a huge infrastructure bill, something like 1.9 million or what have you. We had news early this morning, trillion rather.
Yeah.
And we had news early this morning saying that Joe Manchin was officially voting against this. Is that good? Is that bad? The Democrats want to do infrastructure now. The Republicans wanted to do it before. Why don't the Republicans want to do it now? And this could help a lot of states. What are your thoughts on that? Should the government be passing these big bills? I know it's a big topic, but it's is there any consistency here? Because it seems in the past the Republicans wanted to get infrastructure done. They weren't able to. Democrats want to now. The Republicans won't vote for it.
You can't fall for the language game here.
Sure.
Infrastructure is too broad, as are the bills. The bills are too big. The reason that the reason that the current Build Back Better infrastructure bill did not pass is because it contains, for whatever infrastructure it actually talks about, it contains an absurd amount of stuff that's horrific, even to the point where Manchin, et cetera, have backed out of it. And so to call it just, the Democrats, the Republicans went for infrastructure and it failed, and now the Democrats are going for infrastructure and whatever, it misses all of the content. So you actually alluded to it. It's when you get to the size of these bills, thousands and thousands of pages calling for trillions of dollars of investment, you don't actually always, it could be literally, depending on what the sentence is. Like, imagine there was a bill that says we just ignore the Constitution as one sentence somewhere, section, way down paragraph 9,000.
Nobody's read it. Nobody's even got to that page.
So there could be one sentence in there that should disqualify the bill completely if it's actually, or we're going to give all $1.9 trillion to Hunter Biden. If that was in the bill, everybody should vote against that, right? So when you have these gigantic bills where you don't technically necessarily know everything that's in them, you can't just catch it in a word like infrastructure and say, well, it's about bridges and stuff. Well, we just had all the Democratic politicians all year telling us all these things that are infrastructure that are not infrastructure. And so what do you mean by infrastructure? It's way too low resolution. And so what we should be very upset about right now is the number of politicians we have that are pushing low resolution categories with gigantic bills, with gigantic expenditure attached to very low resolution understanding of what's in that to the general populace, which creates division, and then to Congress, who might end up voting for something because they want these three things but not that one. And that's ultimately part of the problem, the hugeness of these bills, and then the blanket name that's given to what they're supposed to stand for that's not very representative of what they actually stand for.
It's hard to keep up, too. I feel like there's been a few $trillion-dollar bills being passed.
There have been like 4.
I wanted to pivot and ask you, it's popular to rag on senators, congressmen, congresspeople. Do you think that any particular congressperson is doing a good job?
Yeah, it depends. There are a few people who are speaking up and starting to do a pretty good job.
Could you name drop?
I'm pretty impressed, to be honest with you, with the kind of fight that you're seeing coming out of people like Lauren Boebert, for example. Senator Cotton has brought quite a bit of fight. Thomas Massey's doing a great job of bringing the fight. I know a couple of others that are doing a pretty good job. Dan Bishop is all right. Andy Biggs is doing good. There's a number of these, and you'll notice that I've only named Republicans, that are actually speaking up and doing, a pretty good job of standing up for constitutional principles and constitutional principles first.
I know we've kind of touched on it, but I just wanted to kind of make it clear and obvious. What do you think the biggest threat to America is the woke ideology and CRT?
I think it is the things that are driving the woke ideology, and the woke ideology is therefore their mechanism. And so by one degree of separation, yes. I do. And I'll also say, because he's standing in his principles, that to the degree that he's doing it as a Democrat, Joe Manchin, and even Kristen Sinema.
Yeah.
She's standing up. She's saying what she thinks is right. I don't have to agree with everything she says. So people who are willing to stand up and look at the Constitution as their terra firma for the country, and that they're going to stand up for the principles like that, I can say I can respect that at least. So I didn't mean to divert off the other question.
That's absolutely cool. There's one thing on my mind, because I do follow you closely on Twitter. I do see that you make and this is something you're criticized for a lot. This really pisses off all the liberal journalists. They really get pissed off when you make these comparisons of the vaccine mandates and lockdowns to the Holocaust. Can you tell me,
let's be careful.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. If you could make clear what exactly you think and the response.
I make a comparison to the mid-1930s Germany, which led to the Holocaust.
Sure.
The Holocaust was the so-called final solution that was dropped, starting in 1942. Mm-hmm. The Holocaust literally comes from the Greek word that means to destroy with fire.
Yes.
And so up until that point, this was groundwork. What I see is that we're on similar enough tracks to raise an alarm. Mm-hmm. We're seeing public health invoked. We're seeing the ghettoization of an scapegoated minority. The unvaccinated now in this country have been made a minority. That's scapegoated. What was the line? It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I see too many parallels for comfort to where we should be looking at this and taking it very, very seriously. Some of the parallels are so stark that we should be looking at what's happening and realizing it could happen here.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily predict. I don't think there will be a literal fire-based Holocaust.
Sure.
It's very unlikely that we're going to see.
Right
1930s,
now, some people are
40s.
saying, in Australia, they're forcing people to go into these.
Well, yes.
And they're calling that concentration
in New
camps.
York, if they can do it, maybe.
I'm trying to have nuance here because I've covered many anti-vax rallies, and at some of these, there's a Holocaust survivor who she herself makes these comparisons. So it irks me a little bit too because there's a lot of people, Jewish and not Jewish, they complain about when the comparison is made, but. A few years ago when we had different border security where we're separating parents from children, AOC was comparing that. People were making allusions to the Holocaust then. I know when Donald Trump was running, they were comparing him to Hitler. It seems that we're constantly making these Holocaust references. Do you truly believe that these are good analogies whenever they're made? Because we rag on Democrats for saying Trump's Hitler. We all laugh at that.
Right.
And we laugh at Democrats when they say separate, whatever border policy we have, they're comparing that to concentration camps. Isn't it hypocritical now to use the same illusions? Isn't it a little bit extreme of the rhetoric?
No. What you need is discernment. You need to be able to tell baloney from truth.
Yes.
And if the thing that's actually happening is showing remarkable parallels, you should take that seriously. If, on the other hand, it's just people calling names, then no, you can't. So it's certainly not hypocritical because nobody was rounding anybody up for any reason, public health or otherwise, and trying to create camps.
So here, we're rounding them up at the border. And here, that could be 1930s. They could say, hey, they're rounding them up at the border. They're concentrating them together in camps that they can't leave. I mean, I wouldn't call that anywhere on the way to a Holocaust.
No,
but you
absolutely
could say at
not.
the beginning it was one of those first steps in rounding people up. So is that on the path?
Well, no, because those are not citizens. So the goal was to catch people who are not citizens at the border, to put them in a situation where they can process that whatever legal details need to be processed, and to send them back, to set them free in their own countries of origin, not to keep them there indefinitely, not to put them into labor in service of the country or whatever it happens to be, where when you are starting to now seize actual citizens unconstitutionally and put them into on the basis of, say, public health, which is exactly what the Gesundheitspass, what the Nazis used as a justification, first for creating the ghettos, and secondly for rounding up and sending Jews into labor camps, which were not death camps yet. When you see this kind of different, the situation is completely different. You're rounding up citizens on a pretext that matches something that happened in history, where they were rounding up Jews who I guess often weren't technically considered citizens, but they lived there. They had lived there for sometimes generations, many generations. It's a completely different perspective than, oh, people have entered our country illegally, we have to process those people, and then we're going to release them back free in their own countries of origin once we figure out where that is and how we're going to get them there safely. It's a completely different
I saw the Holocaust Museum
situation.
Tweeted at you over this.
The Auschwitz Memorial,
the Auschwitz Memorial, rather.
Yeah, so that we don't get anybody blamed for anything.
How does it feel for that, a lot of people make these comparisons. You're not the only one who makes it. I don't know if everybody gets an Auschwitz memorial tweet at them. What do you think about them tweeting at you?
It was extraordinarily disappointing. Their motto for every good possible reason is never again. And it's not, well, maybe again if it looks kind of like there's a good reason.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it was extremely disappointing, especially given that they made the leap and I didn't make the leap, which I thought was very strange. I just posted, people could guess at my intentions, but I posted a video from history and said the justification that the Nazis gave in the early 1940s and late 1930s for rounding up Jews and ghettoizing Jews was public health.
Yeah.
And I posted a video clip from history, and they attacked and said, how dare you compare vaccine mandates, as if somehow they know that might be the thing that's being reflected
and
there.
This is a memorial page. They should be reflecting on. It shouldn't be getting political at all. But we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time. Was there, quickly in conclusion, anything else that you wanted to say or mention?
Well, I've got a book coming out to explain critical race theory, hopefully within the next month to 2 months. It's going to be called Race Marxism. It explains that critical race theory is Marxism that makes race the central construct for understanding inequality in a place of economic class, how that came to be, the underlying theology of critical race theory, and I mean that very seriously. I think it's a bad religion, if you will. And so you want to keep your eyes open for Race Marxism coming out. I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Mr. Lindsay, thank you again for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.